التي شاخت وهرمت وتريد طاقة بشرية، ولا أقوى من طاقتنا البشرية. نحن المسلمين يتمنون لنا الموت، ولكنهم فقدوا إخصابهم ويبحثون عن إخصاب عندنا. سنخصبهم وسوف ننزل وسوف ننجب منهم، لأننا سوف نفتح بلادهم رغم أنوفكم يا أيها الألمان، يا أيها الأمريكان، يا أيها الفرنسيون، يا أيها الطليان، يا كل من على وزن الطليان. خذوا اللاجئين، سنطلبهم منكم قريبا باسم دولة الخلافة القادمة، وسنقول لكم هؤلاء أبناؤنا أرسلوهم أو نرسل لكم جيوش.
Since the middle of the last century, our countries have been forced into a multiracial and multicultural mode. We have been forced to put our lives on hold to shelter the world's unfortunate masses and care for their well-being at our expense. For decades, untold millions of migrants from the Third World have been steadily pouring into our countries and changing our way of life beyond the point of recognition. As the situation in the West continues to deteriorate, as our resources are diminished, as our system is strained, as the government benefits begin to dry up, and as our people continue to be washed away in a sea of black and brown, the dystopian nightmare that is multiracialism becomes ever more apparent. It's clearer now than ever that diversity is not working. Every single day, we are told by our politicians, by our media, by our corporations, and especially by our indoctrination centers, that being our universities, that diversity is our strength, that it is our differences that bring us together and unite us as one people. Really? Can any sensible person believe such rubbish? Anyone that studies history with an impartial mind will find that from ancient Greece and Rome and China to more modern examples of Yugoslavia and Rwanda, whenever vastly different groups of people are placed within one shared territory and there is no incentive to live aside each other, infighting between the tribes will inevitably break out shortly afterwards. But even putting race aside, if anyone examines all the countless conflicts throughout history, spurred up by groups of people with very staunch differences or disagreements in culture, religion, politics, economics, class, and values, it's easy to see that diversity of any kind is a source of tension. But how many of our women and girls have to be preyed upon by the migrant rape gangs? How much lower does our economy have to tank? How much longer must we endure the diversity quotas? How many more times must we be spat in the face by the very people we invite into our countries? How much longer do we have to close our eyes to the anti-white propaganda and discrimination? How much longer must we live as second-class citizens in our own homelands until the anti-white reality finally sinks in? Until we finally say, enough is enough? Until we can finally declare that diversity is not a strength, that diversity is destroying our countries? Until we can finally stand up and declare in a unified and dignified manner that our countries are not up for the taking. Countries need to be built on fundamental traits that can firmly bind all countrymen together, especially in times of turmoil, and there are no traits more binding than those which we are born with. Among all the traits, race is arguably the most bedrock of them all. Multiracial and multicultural nations have no immovable trait which ties the people together. These kinds of nations are designed from conception to meet a swift and often violent end, and having not even a common culture or a common set of values to assimilate to and live by just speeds up the process. But as for my beloved America, as my country continues to rapidly diversify, there is less and less of a willing and honest effort to assimilate the roughly 1 to 2 million immigrants that arrive here every single year, the largest annual rate of influx than any other nation in the world. And any assimilation effort that is carried out is labeled as xenophobic and intolerant. What right do you have to project your culture on immigrants? They scream. What makes you think your culture is any more superior than theirs? Don't you know that all cultures are equal? Then, in the very next breath, they complain that our culture is too Eurocentric and should be diversified. Total hypocrisy. Nevertheless, the reality is, when we as the host population fail to promote our way of life to the newcomers and instead do everything to accommodate their way of life, immigrants then have no incentive to assimilate to our laws and our culture. They just pick a side of the country to live in and start to form enclaves. And as their numbers grow into the millions, we start to get Chinatowns and Koreatowns, or little Mexicos and little Somalias. Out of our benevolence, we invite them into our country. We breed nothing but welfare and benefits for them on our tax dollar, and in return, they drain our system and breed nothing but contempt for us and our way of life. And once those handouts fall short in supply, they will show us just how much contempt they hold for us. And as time passes, they will eventually gain a foothold into the power structure of our nation. And as their numbers continue to grow endlessly, they will eventually outnumber the host population, and naturally the power will fall into their hands, and America will be reshaped in their image. But America is a nation of immigrants, right? Or so the popular mantra goes. To a certain degree, this is true. America was indeed a nation of immigrants, but only for the right group of people. America did have periods in its history where it took in large amounts of immigrants, but it prioritized the acceptance of mainly immigrants of European descent, and after accepting these immigrants, this country would take long pauses to begin a thorough assimilation process. Furthermore, this process was far easier for European immigrants to go through because America, although an independent nation, was an extension of Europe and harbored much of the European character and culture. Although an ocean away, America was home to the European mentality, values, and tens of millions of her descendants. And with the passing of centuries and being exposed to an entirely different environment, European descendants living on the American continent gradually evolved into their own individual group. The European people on this land gradually developed their own unique culture, physical appearance, distinct accents, and yes, their own race. That's how evolution works. To claim that for all of its history, America was a nation of immigrants to all the races of the world is an absolute lie that only the brainwashed and the power-hungry can convince themselves of. And it is essential to shine a light on the lies and the liars. And by far, the biggest lie the American government ever sold us in the 20th century was the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965, whose effects we are still feeling to this day. This one law alone almost single-handedly changed the face of our country from a nearly 90% white, first-world powerhouse to an increasingly third-world hellhole. This law stripped America of its self-determination and opened its borders to the entire world. They did this because America was the land of opportunity. Well, actually, they were right. America was the land of opportunity, but only for our people. Some poem on a statue gifted to us for reasons completely irrelevant to the issue of immigration was not meant to dictate to Americans that their land was up for grabs for whoever was lucky enough to reach our shores, that our precious soil was now the dumping ground for the world and its problems. The American people, the American race, was never once asked if they wanted to become a minority in their own land, in the land that their ancestors built. In fact, the very people in favor of this measure promised us that the bill would, quote, not upset the ethnic balance of our country. Even our president at the time, Lyndon Johnson called us un-American for wanting to keep America American. We must say it loudly and clearly. The American people were lied to by their government. And as our situation continued to become more and more precarious, our government decided to give up on us entirely, on the Native Americans of this country, and condemned us to go the way of the other so-called Native Americans.
Not only our Muslim communities, but African communities, Asian communities, Hispanic communities, and the wave still continues. It's not going to stop, nor should we want it to stop. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I think we can be most proud of. So there's a second thing in that black box, an unrelenting stream of immigration, non-stop. Folks like me who were Caucasian of European descent, for the first time in 2017, will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America. Absolute minority. Fewer than 50% of the people in America, from then and on, will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength.
They abandoned the real Americans and accepted the multiracial future of the United States. And now they spend their time pandering to the non-Americans in our country for their votes. But it is not only our government who bears the blame. The people also bear much of the blame as well. Americans, particularly the middle class, saw the country changing before their eyes, but did nothing about it. They ran to the safety of their white suburbs, to escape the forced busing, to escape the forced integration, to escape the browning that was taking place on the outside. Their inaction dragged them deeper into this mess, and now it is up to us, the American race, the real Americans, to get ourselves out of this mess. But unfortunately, America and the West has set itself on a suicidal path and is actively doing whatever it can to bring itself closer towards racial and cultural extinction. Many of my fellow Americans have concluded that either their race is an abomination or that the phenomenon of race entirely does not matter. They have decided that some false sense of virtue is more viable than the natural order. My people are unable to resist their coming demise because they have been convinced by our enemies that we stand as uniquely evil in history and that we must atone for our sins by giving up not only our hard-earned possessions of land, wealth, resources, and achievements, but also our pride in who we are. And we dare not challenge their efforts, lest we be called a racist. Without question, we have allowed them to bound and gag us, to drag us into the ritual of guilt, and to dance us around the simmering pit of unspecified crimes. It's time to shake ourselves out of this crippling guilt. You don't go around carrying the chains of guilt for the mistakes your ancestors made from generations ago. You learn from their mistakes, and you do your best not to repeat them. You make a pledge to yourself that you will do your best to do better. You commit to your word, then you move on. Nature does not wait for those who wallow around over the cracks in the old road. It tosses that miserable bunch aside and finds a fresh bunch willing to pave a new road ahead. But it seems Americans have decided to be the former. Instead of our people reserving their collective energy for the threats that lie just outside of our borders, they're busy wasting their time beating themselves up over how bad they are. And for this, nature is teaching us a very long and excruciating lesson, and if we don't soon pick up on the obvious truths being thrown at us, it will result in our total dispossession and replacement. When life is boiled down to its most fundamental, it really just comes down to our survival. In our modern age, certainly in the more developed parts of the world, seldom do we think about primitive and often vicious methods of survival, as seen in the animal kingdom. Most of us don't waste time at night thinking about how we're going to survive another day. It is often said with a great sigh of relief that in the face of conflict, There is no longer any reason to use savagery to get what we need and what we want. We can resolve our disputes by more civil means, through cooperation, reasoning, and the rule of law. This is all possible provided that we maintain a stable, trust-filled, and cooperative society. And one of the main pillars needed to create and maintain such a society is homogeneity, more specifically, racial homogeneity. It is an undeniable fact that ethnically and racially intact societies breed far more trust than any multiracial or multicultural fantasy could ever do. But don't just take my word for it. Here is one of America's most prominent black power figures making his own case against racial diversity.
And I'm sure no intelligent white person watching this show, or no intelligent white man in his or her right white mind, want black boys and black girls marrying their white sons and daughters, and in return introducing their grandchildren as half-brown, kinky-haired black people.
I wouldn't object to that.
Well, you wouldn't, but a lot of them would.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people. No, this is the point.
What I'm trying to say is this. And you don't have it. You say you don't, but you don't have it. You really ain't gonna have it. You on the show, and you got to say that. But
that's not true.
Why would you want to do that?
Because I don't think I'm any different from you. You see.
Yeah, we much different.
I mean, I think society's made us different.
You know we're different. We all together.
Society's made us different.
No, not society. God made us different.
No, we're just human beings. He made all of us.
We all listen. Bluebirds fly with bluebirds. Red birds want to be with red birds. Listen. Tell me when I'm wrong. Pigeons want to be with pigeons.
But
Tell
we
me
have
when I'm wrong.
intelligence.
We should have. They don't have intelligence, but yet they stay together. We should have more intelligence than them, right? Buzzards are with buzzards. Right? Buzzards are with buzzards. Bluebirds are with bluebirds. They all are birds, but they got different cultures. The eagles like to hang out in the mountains. The buzzard like to fly around the desert.
Well,
the bluebird like to fly around the trees and the grass.
There'd be certain problems, a buzzard mating with a sparrow, wouldn't there?
What?
There'd be certain.
Right. And we have the problems too.
No,
I don't see no black and white couples in England or America walking around proud, holding their children.
That's because society
and going out.
That's society's fault. I mean, we've got to educate people around it.
Well, life is too short for me to be raised catching hell for something like that. I'd rather go and be my own. I have a beautiful daughter, beautiful wife. They look like me. We're all happy, and I don't have no trouble.
I understand. Yeah, I do understand. I understand. But I think it's sad that it
ain't sad because I want my child to look like me. Every intelligent person wants his child to look like him. I'm sad because I want to blot out my race and lose my beautiful identity. Chinese love Chinese. They love the little slanted-eyed, pretty brown-skinned babies. Pakistanis love their culture. Jewish people love their culture. A lot of Catholics don't want to marry number of Catholics. They want the religion to stay the same. Who want to spot up yourself and kill your race? You a hater of your people if you don't want to stay who you are. You shame what God made you. God didn't make no mistake when he made us all like we were.
I think that's a philosophy of despair.
Despair.
I really do.
It ain't no despair.
Number
one, can't no woman. Let me tell you something. I want to tell you. Listen, no woman on this whole earth, not even a black woman in Muslim countries, can please me and cook for me and socialize and talk to me like my American black woman. No woman, and last is a white woman, can really identify with me and my feelings and the way I act and the way I talk. See? And you can't take no Chinese man and give him no Puerto Rican woman and holler about we're in love and you emotionally in love and physically, but really they're not happy because she's gonna hear some Puerto Rican music, he's gonna hear some Chinese music, and they're gonna be clashing all the time. It's just nature. You can do what you want, but it's nature to want to be with your own. I want to be with my own.
But as our circumstances continue to worsen, and when we can't even voice our concerns and frustrations freely and honestly, the room for civil cooperation and negotiation over these issues begins to narrow out of our options. In extreme times, otherwise normal and decent folks begin to rationalize taking more extreme and destructive measures to resolve these problems. If we want to avoid the bloodshed and the violence looming in the distance, then we have a duty to start normalizing the conversation about these issues and start thinking about possible solutions right now. Nature is a rather stubborn force. The continuation of the European race and its civilization ultimately comes down to whether we are daring enough to unapologetically assert ourselves as a distinct and legitimate race with legitimate interests, and vigorously defend our right to exist. Because you see, nature wastes no time for those who have no spine, for those who bend the knee to the bigger man, for those who beg for forgiveness for any accusation or label thrown at them. The future only belongs to those tribes that remain united and proud, and are willing to pass the threshold of discomfort and endure the hardship as one people. And if we fail to do so, nature, without any hesitation at all, will push us aside and fill the void with a new race that is willing enough to do what we failed to do. Because in nature, there is no such thing as a multiracial or multicultural society. There's only the transition and replacement of power and population from one people to the next. And as the night follows the day, we will follow the footsteps of the other great peoples and civilizations into the graveyard of history. The future will study how yet another great people fell on its own sword. As British historian Arnold Toynbee infamously noted, great civilizations die by suicide, not by murder. To reiterate, no country in the West ever voted to have their homeland change so rapidly and so fundamentally as we see today. It wouldn't make any sense even if they did, because to do so would go directly against their own interests. What distinct and autonomous people would dream of becoming a minority in their own country? Why would a native people want to lose their majority status and all the rights and privileges that come with it? They would lose their culture. They would lose their political power. They would lose their language. They would lose their homeland. And they would lose their race. They would lose it all to the more dominant group replacing them. It wouldn't make much sense, would it? But it's rather interesting how the entire Western world started to experience these changes at around the same time. It's almost as though there is some globally coordinated effort to dismantle our civilization and replace our people. Call me crazy. Nevertheless, if we wish to preserve a future for our own kind, then now, right now, is the time to spring into action. Because there is in fact a point of no return, and we are already about 6 decades behind. The longer we wait, the more difficult and the more painful the road ahead will be. And if we stand around idle for much longer, things will spiral so far out of control that we will have nothing left to defend, not even the skin on our backs. If we do not solve the problem of diversity soon, nature will on its own terms.